Stand on the northern coast of Tunisia today, and you can see Roman columns jutting from manicured grass, tourists wandering ruins that were built on top of ruins. The suburb of Tunis called Carthage is home to embassies, presidential palaces, and Mediterranean villas worth millions. But rewind 2,200 years and you would have found the largest city in the Western world. A maritime superpower controlling trade routes from Gibraltar to the Levant, fielding armies that nearly brought Rome to its knees. Wealth, war, fire, ash. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of Carthage's story. From Phoenician traders beaching their boats in 814 BC to the salted ruins that Scipio Aemilianus left behind in 146 BC, and the shadow that city cast across 3 continents for 600 years. This is the civilization Rome feared more than any other. This is the empire Rome spent a century destroying. This is Carthage. In 814 BC, according to Roman historians writing centuries later, a Phoenician princess named Elissa, later called Dido, fled the city of Tyre after her brother Pygmalion murdered her husband to seize his wealth. She sailed west with a handful of loyalists, gold hidden in the hulls, and a plan to buy land from the Berber king Iarbas. The king offered her as much territory as she could cover with an ox hide. Dido cut the hide into thin strips, laid them end to end, and encircled a hill overlooking a natural harbour. The Berbers called the hill Byrsa, the hide. The Phoenicians called their new settlement Carthage, new city, Carthage. The myth is beautiful, the archaeology tells a more prosaic story. Phoenician sailors from Tyre and Sidon had been exploring the North African coast for decades, establishing trading posts at Utica, Lixus, and Gades. Carthage was simply the most successful. A deep-water port positioned perfectly between the eastern and western Mediterranean, sheltered by the Cape Bon Peninsula, blessed with fertile hinterlands. The settlers built docks and warehouses first, temples second. They worshipped Baal Hammon and his consort Tanit, gods of sky and fertility imported directly from Tyre. They spoke Punic, a dialect of Phoenician written right to left. They saw themselves not as Africans or colonists, but as Tyrians abroad, merchants who happened to live 3 weeks' sail from home. For 2 centuries, Carthage remained a minor port in the Phoenician network, sending tribute back to Tyre, trading African ivory and Spanish silver for Lebanese cedar and Egyptian grain. Then, in 573 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II besieged Tyre for 13 years and broke the city's power forever. Suddenly, every Phoenician settlement in the west was independent, and Carthage, the youngest and richest, became the new center of gravity. By 500 BC, Carthage controlled the richest trade network in the western Mediterranean. Punic merchant fleets sailed routes their Phoenician ancestors had pioneered, west through the Pillars of Hercules to the tin mines of Cornwall, south along the African coast beyond the Sahara, north to Gaul for amber and slaves. Hanno the Navigator, a Carthaginian admiral, led an expedition of 60 ships and 30,000 colonists down the West African coast, founding settlements as far south as modern Cameroon. Another explorer, Himilco, reached the British Isles and returned with tales of fog, sea monsters, and seaweed thick enough to stop ships. These voyages were not adventures. They were corporate expansions. Carthage needed tin for bronze, silver for coinage, gold for temples, grain for a growing population that had passed 100,000. The city's merchant princes, the heads of old Phoenician families with names like Mago, Hanno, Hamilcar, formed an oligarchy that elected 2 Sophates, or judges, each year to administer laws and lead fleets. The Carthaginian Senate, composed of several hundred aristocrats, held the real power. A council of elders reviewed major decisions. A court of 104 audited generals after campaigns, acquitting victors, crucifying failures. It was a system designed to prevent kings. The Carthaginians remembered Pygmalion, but oligarchy required constant revenue, and revenue required control of trade routes, which required force. By 480 BC, Carthage had vassalized the Berber tribes of the interior, annexed the Phoenician cities of western Sicily, and turned Sardinia and Iberia into tribute-paying protectorates. The city itself exploded in size. Engineers dredged the circular harbors, one for merchants, one for the navy, capable of sheltering 220 warships under covered slips. Masons raised walls 40 feet high and 20 feet thick, triple-layered with gates that could be sealed in minutes. The Bursa Hill became a fortress crowned with the Temple of Eshmun, its bronze doors visible from the sea. At the harbor's edge stood the rectangular Tophet, a sacred precinct where, according to Greek and Roman writers, Carthaginian elites sacrificed their firstborn sons to Baal Hammon during times of crisis, burning infants alive in the outstretched arms of bronze statues. Archaeologists have excavated thousands of urns containing charred infant bones from the Tophet. Whether these were sacrifices or merely infant burials remains one of the bitterest debates in ancient history. What is certain is that Carthage's neighbors feared them. For nearly 3 centuries, Carthage was the wealthiest city west of Alexandria. Its population reached 400,000, larger than Athens, larger than Syracuse, rivaled only by Rome. The merchant harbor alone handled ships from 50 ports. Warehouses along the waterfront stored Spanish silver, Sardinian lead, African ivory, Gallic slaves, isthmus, and Egyptian papyrus. Punic coins, stamped with horses, palms, and the head of Tanit, were accepted currency from Gibraltar to Athens. The Maganid family, Carthage's most powerful dynasty, financed agricultural treatises that Roman writers later translated and preserved. Margot the agronomist wrote 28 books on crop rotation, irrigation, and vineyard management. Texts so influential that after Carthage's destruction, the Roman Senate ordered them translated into Latin as the only Carthaginian works worth saving. The fertile Cape Bon Peninsula became a testing ground for Punic farming. Olive groves, wheat fields, and vineyards worked by Berber tenants and slave labor, feeding both the city and the fleet. But Carthage's wealth made it a target. In 480 BC, the same year Xerxes invaded Greece, Hamilcar Mago led a Carthaginian army of 300,000, likely exaggerated, across Sicily to destroy the Greek city of Syracuse. He was defeated and killed at the Battle of Himera by the tyrant Gelon. The Carthaginians paid 2,000 talents in reparations and withdrew. For 70 years, they avoided major wars, focusing instead on consolidating control in Africa and Iberia. Then, in 410 BC, Hannibal Mago, grandson of the defeated Hamilcar, returned to Sicily and sacked Himera, burning it to ash. His lieutenant Himilco sacked Acragas in 406 BC, carrying off bronze statues and enslaving 25,000 Greeks. The Sicilian Wars had begun, a grinding, century-long conflict between Carthage and the Greek city-states of Sicily, punctuated by sieges, massacres, and uneasy truces. Carthage won more than it lost. By 300 BC, Punic forces controlled 2/3 of Sicily. Generals from the Barcid family, Hamilcar Barca, his son-in-law Hasdrubal, his sons Hannibal and Mago, built a quasi-independent empire in Iberia, founding Carthage in Iberia, New Carthage, modern Cartagena. They mined Spanish silver to pay African mercenaries, Numidian cavalry, Balearic slingers, Iberian swordsmen. They recruited Gallic warriors from beyond the Pyrenees. Carthage's army was never Carthaginian. It was a multinational mercenary force bound by gold, not loyalty, a structural weakness Rome would later exploit. But for now, in 264 BC, Carthage stood unchallenged. Its fleets patrolled from Gades to Tyre. Its merchants controlled the tin trade, the silver trade, the ivory trade. Its treasury overflowed. The city of Dido had become the city of gold. And across the sea, 200 miles to the north, a rising republic called Rome watched and envied, and began sharpening its swords. The First Punic War began in 264 BC over a border dispute in Sicily, and became the longest continuous conflict in ancient history. 23 years of naval battles, sieges, and attrition that killed hundreds of thousands. Rome had no navy in 264. By 260, Roman engineers had reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian quinquereme, mass-produced 120 copies, and invented the corvus, a boarding ramp that turned naval battles into infantry melees. At the Battle of Mylae, Roman marines boarded Carthaginian ships and butchered their crews. Carthage lost 50 ships. Rome lost none. For 2 decades the war ground on. Carthaginian fleets raided the Italian coast. Roman legions besieged Punic strongholds in Sicily. In 256 BC, the Roman general Marcus Atilius Regulus landed in Africa with 15,000 men and marched on Carthage itself. The city's senate panicked and hired a Spartan mercenary captain named Xanthippus to reorganize the army. Xanthippus drilled the Carthaginians in phalanx warfare, deployed war elephants against Roman cavalry, and crushed Regulus at the Battle of Tunis. Regulus was captured, paraded through Carthage in chains, and, according to legend, sent back to Rome to negotiate peace, then returned voluntarily to Carthage to be tortured to death. The legend is almost certainly false. The war's outcome was not. In 241 BC, a Roman fleet destroyed the last Carthaginian navy off the Aegates Islands. Carthage, bankrupt and exhausted, sued for peace. Rome seized Sicily, imposed a crippling indemnity, and waited. Carthage's unpaid mercenaries mutinied. The mercenary war of 240–238 BC nearly destroyed the city. 20,000 African troops and Libyan rebels besieging Carthage, crucifying captured Punic generals, severing supply lines. Hamilcar Barca crushed the rebellion with systematic brutality, then turned his ambitions west. He took his 9-year-old son Hannibal to a temple, made the boy swear eternal enmity to Rome, and sailed for Iberia to rebuild Carthage's fortunes in silver and blood. By 218 BC, the Barcid family controlled Iberia, fielding armies financed by Spanish mines. When Hannibal sacked Saguntum, a Roman ally, Rome declared war. Hannibal responded by marching 50,000 men and 37 war elephants across the Alps into Italy. The Second Punic War had begun. For 16 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy. He destroyed Roman armies at the Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and at Cannae, where 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. The worst defeat in Roman history. But Hannibal never took Rome. His Carthaginian Senate refused to send reinforcements. His Italian allies defected. In 204 BC, the Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio landed in Africa and threatened Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled. In 202 BC, at Zama, Scipio defeated him. The peace terms were annihilating. Carthage surrendered its entire navy except 10 ceremonial ships. It paid 10,000 talents over 50 years. It ceded Iberia to Rome. It agreed never to wage war without Roman permission. The city that once ruled the Western Mediterranean became a Roman client state, forbidden to defend itself. And yet, even castrated, Carthage remained wealthy. Within 2 generations, the indemnity was paid off. Merchants rebuilt trade networks. Farmers expanded olive groves and vineyards. The city's population held steady at 200,000. Punic ships, now unarmed, still carried grain to Italy, wool to Egypt, wine to Gaul. In Rome, the senator Marcus Porcius Cato returned from an embassy to Carthage in 153 BC and declared to the Senate, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. He ended every speech with that line, no matter the topic. Taxes, road repairs, grain subsidies, Carthage must be destroyed. Cato held up fresh figs in the Senate chamber, still moist from the tree, and said they had been picked in Carthage 3 days earlier. A city so close, so rich, and so resented could not be allowed to exist. In 149 BC, Rome demanded Carthage surrender 300 noble hostages. The city complied. Rome demanded Carthage surrender all weapons. The city complied, handing over 200,000 swords and 2,000 catapults. Then Rome delivered the final demand: abandon the city and resettle 10 miles inland, away from the sea. For a maritime people, it was a death sentence. Carthage chose war. The Third Punic War was not a war. It was a siege. For 3 years, Roman legions surrounded the city, while Carthaginian defenders built weapons in secret foundries, melted gold to pay defenders, and held the walls. Women cut their hair to make bowstrings. The Senate armed slaves and promised them freedom. In the spring of 146 BC, the Roman general Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the Scipio who defeated Hannibal, breached the walls. Roman soldiers poured into the city and fought house to house for 6 days. Fires consumed entire districts. 50,000 Carthaginians died in the streets. 50,000 more were sold into slavery. Scipio's officers asked him what to do with the survivors barricaded in the temple of Eshmun on the Bursa. Scipio ordered the temple burned. The last Carthaginians immolated themselves inside. When the fires died, Roman engineers demolished the walls, filled in the harbors, and plowed the ruins with salt. Or so the legend says. Archaeologists have found no evidence of salting. The story is likely a medieval invention, but the destruction was real. Carthage, the city that stood for 668 years, was erased in 6 days. For a century, the ruins sat empty. Roman law forbade resettlement, but Carthage's harbor was too valuable, its farmland too fertile, its location too strategic. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar authorized a colony of Roman veterans on the site. His heir Augustus completed the project. By 1 AD, Colonia Julia Carthago was the 4th largest city in the empire. A thoroughly Roman metropolis of Latin-speaking citizens, paved streets, aqueducts, bathhouses, and amphitheaters built over Punic foundations. The new Carthage became the breadbasket of Rome, shipping 500,000 tons of African grain annually to feed the capital. It became a center of early Christianity. Tertullian and Cyprian preached here. Augustine studied here before becoming Bishop of Hippo. The mosaics, columns, and cisterns of Roman Carthage still stand today, excavated by French archaeologists in the 19th century. But Punic Carthage, the city of Dido, Hannibal, and the merchant fleets, left almost nothing. The Romans obliterated it. What we know of Carthaginian history comes almost entirely from Greek and Roman writers. Polybius, Livy, Appian, Diodorus Siculus. Not a single Punic history survives, not a single Carthaginian poem. We have Mago's agricultural treatises in Latin translation. We have Punic inscriptions on tombstones and temple dedications, most untranslated until the 20th century. We have Greek complaints about Carthaginian child sacrifice, Roman denunciations of Punic treachery. We have the ruins of the Tophet. We have amphora stamps, coins, anchors dredged from shipwrecks. Archaeologists have mapped the circular harbors, the triple walls, the grid of streets running up the Bursa. UNESCO declared the site a World Heritage Site in 1979. But the voice of Carthage itself, the literature, philosophy, histories written by Carthaginians about Carthaginians, is silent. Rome won not only the wars but the narrative. For 2,000 years, Carthage existed only as Rome's great enemy, the shadow that justified Roman conquest, the cautionary tale of a civilization that dared rival the Republic and paid the ultimate price. Stand on the Bursa Hill today, where the Carthaginian Acropolis once crowned the harbor, and you can see Roman columns rising from French excavations, tourists photographing the Mediterranean view, and the modern suburb of Carthage spreading along the coast. A city of embassies and millionaires built on layers of ruin. The Punic ports are visible from above, twin circles of shallow water where archaeologists have found ancient slipways that once sheltered 220 warships. The Tophet lies behind a fence, rows of limestone markers where urns of infant remains were buried alongside inscriptions to Tanit and Baal. The Antonine Baths, built by Romans 3 centuries after the destruction, sprawl across 15 acres of waterfront, proof that even conquerors could not ignore Carthage's natural advantages. But the Carthage of Hannibal and Dido, the maritime superpower that ruled the western Mediterranean for 6 centuries, exists now only in fragments. Amphora shards in museum cases, coins stamped with warships and palm trees, Latin translations of agricultural manuals, and Roman accounts of the wars that destroyed it. Cato got his wish, Scipio got his triumph, Rome got an empire, Carthage got silence, and yet the city that Rome spent a century trying to erase became the enemy. Rome could never forget, the only rival that forced the Republic to mobilize every legion, to build fleets from scratch, to fight for survival on Italian soil. Rome defined itself against Carthage. In destroying the Punic capital, Rome made it immortal. Carthage fell. Carthage endured.